The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated in the darkness between stars. It was neutral ground where no single species could claim power. Today, representatives from 12 different alien races had gathered in the Great Council Chamber. The room was huge, with seats arranged in a perfect circle. Each delegation sat behind curved desks that matched their species' needs. Ambassador Kethvar of the Saurian Empire sat tall in his chair. His reptilian skin was dark green with gold markings that showed his high rank. His yellow eyes moved slowly across the room, taking in each delegate. The Saurians had been spacefaring for over 3,000 years. They controlled the largest military force in known space. Across from him sat Counselor HFY of the Ethereal Collective. Her pale blue skin seemed to glow with soft light. Her large black eyes held ancient wisdom. The Ethereals were the oldest known species, masters of technology and philosophy. They had been exploring the galaxy for 10,000 years. Between them sat dozens of other delegates, the crystal-skinned Minerans who could live for centuries, the floating gas beings from the nebula worlds, the insect-like hive queens with their perfect coordination. Each species had earned their place through thousands of years of peaceful development. At the smallest desk sat Captain Elena Vasquez. She was human, and she looked very small compared to the other delegates. Her dark hair was pulled back in a military style. Her brown uniform was simple compared to the elaborate clothing worn by others. She had been chosen to represent Earth and the few human colonies beyond their home system. The meeting had been called to discuss humanity's request to join the Galactic Council. Humans had only discovered faster-than-light travel 15 years ago. They had quickly spread to nearby star systems, building colonies and space stations. Now they wanted to trade with other species and share technology. The Galactic Council's leader, an ancient being called the Prime Speaker, stood at the center of the circle. Its body was made of living crystal that rang like bells when it moved. "We gather to decide the fate of the species called humanity," the Prime Speaker announced. Its voice echoed through the chamber. "They have requested membership in our alliance. We must determine if they are ready for such responsibility." Ambassador Kethvar stood up first. His claws clicked against the metal floor as he moved. "The answer is simple," he said in a deep, rumbling voice. "Humans are not ready. They may never be ready." Captain Vasquez started to speak, but Kethvar held up one scaled hand. "I have studied their history carefully. In just the past century, they fought 2 massive wars that killed millions. They created weapons that could destroy their entire world. They poisoned their own planet's air and water. Even now, they fight among themselves over resources and beliefs." Counselor HFY nodded slowly. "My people have also observed humanity's development. Their emotional responses are too strong. They make decisions based on anger and fear rather than logic. This makes them unpredictable and dangerous." A delegate from the Hive Collective spoke next. Its insect-like voice buzzed through a translator. "Our analysis shows humans cannot work together effectively. They have hundreds of different governments on one planet. They cannot even unite their own species. How can they work with others?" Captain Vasquez finally stood up. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice was steady. "You're only looking at our worst moments. Yes, we have made mistakes. Yes, we have fought wars. But we have also shown great kindness. We have saved species from extinction on our own world. We have created beautiful art and music. We have chosen to explore space peacefully." Ambassador Kethvar laughed, a sound like grinding stones. "Peaceful? Your military ships carry enough weapons to level a city. You call your explorers Marines, a word that means warrior in your language." "We carry weapons because space is dangerous," Vasquez replied. "We have encountered hostile life forms. We need to protect our people." "You see?" Counselor HFY said softly. "Their first thought is always violence. When faced with the unknown, they choose aggression over communication." The debate continued for hours. Delegate after delegate spoke against humanity. They brought up every war, every conflict, every act of violence in human history. They showed recordings of human soldiers in battle. They displayed statistics about crime and warfare on Earth. Captain Vasquez tried to defend her species. She spoke about human achievements in science and medicine. She talked about their capacity for love and sacrifice. She mentioned how quickly humans had learned to live in space without destroying their colonies. But for every positive example she gave, the other delegates found 10 negative ones. They had done their research well. They knew about every dark chapter in human history. The prime speaker called for a break. Captain Vasquez sat alone at her desk while the other delegates formed small groups. She could hear them talking quietly, occasionally laughing. She understood enough of their languages to know they were making jokes about humanity. When the session resumed, the prime speaker asked for final statements. Ambassador Kethvar spoke first. Humans are a young species driven by primitive emotions. They have not learned to control their violent nature. If we allow them into galactic society, they will bring chaos and war. They may contaminate our peaceful civilization with their aggression. Counselor HFY was next. I do not believe humans are evil, but they are not ready for the responsibility of galactic citizenship. Perhaps in another 1,000 years, after they have evolved beyond their current limitations, we can reconsider. Other delegates agreed. The Minorans worried about human unpredictability. The Hive Collective feared human individualism would disrupt their perfect order. The Nebula beings thought humans were too focused on material things. Finally, Captain Vasquez stood for her last chance to speak. You are making a mistake, she said. Her voice carried clearly through the chamber. You see only our capacity for violence, but you ignore why we fight. We fight to protect those who cannot protect themselves. We fight against injustice and cruelty. We fight because sometimes fighting is the only way to preserve what is good and right. She paused, looking at each delegate in turn. You have built a peaceful society by avoiding conflict. That is admirable. But peace maintained through isolation is not true peace. It is just the absence of challenge. One day, you will face a threat that cannot be reasoned with or avoided. When that day comes, you will need allies who understand that sometimes violence is the only answer. The chamber fell silent. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Captain Vasquez continued. We are not asking you to become like us. We are offering to stand beside you when others will not. We are offering our strength to defend what you have built. But if you reject us, if you force us into isolation, then when the galaxy needs us, most we will not be there to help. Ambassador Kethvar stood up quickly. Is that a threat, human? It is a promise, Vasquez replied calmly. You are choosing to face the future without humanity at your side. I hope that choice never comes back to hurt you. The vote was quick and unanimous. Every delegate except Captain Vasquez voted to ban humanity from the Galactic Council. More than that, they voted to restrict all human activity to their own solar system. No human ships could travel beyond the edge of their star system. No communication between humans and other species. Complete isolation until humanity could prove they had evolved beyond their violent nature. As security guards escorted Captain Vasquez from the chamber, she heard the delegates laughing and talking excitedly. They had solved the human problem easily. They had protected their peaceful galaxy from the violent newcomers. The last thing she heard was Ambassador Kethvar saying, "Now we can get back to important business without worrying about those angry apes." The chamber door sealed shut, behind her, cutting off the sound of alien laughter. 50 years had passed since the human ban was put in place. The galaxy had changed in many ways during that time. Trade between species had grown stronger than ever before. New technologies were shared freely, leading to advances that benefited everyone. The Galactic Council had expanded to include 3 more species, all of whom had proven themselves worthy of membership through centuries of peaceful development. Ambassador Kethvar was now an old Saurian. His once bright green scales had faded to a dull gray-green. His yellow eyes were not as sharp as they used to be, but he was more powerful than ever. The Saurian Empire now controlled military operations across 3 sectors of space. Their fleet was the largest and most advanced in the galaxy. He often gave speeches to young Saurian officers about the importance of maintaining peace through strength. His favorite example was always the human containment. 50 years ago, He would tell them, "A dangerous species tried to join our alliance. They were violent and unpredictable. But we were wise enough to see the threat they posed. We contained them in their own system before they could spread their chaos to the rest of the galaxy." The young officers would nod and take notes. The human ban had become a standard case study in galactic security academies. Military students learned about it as an example of successful threat prevention. But it was not just the military that remembered humans. They had become a source of entertainment across civilized space. Comedy shows featured jokes about the angry apes trapped in their corner of the galaxy. Popular comedians would imitate human behavior, exaggerating their emotional responses and violent tendencies for laughs. One of the most popular shows was called Primitives in Space. It imagined what humans might be doing in their isolation. The show portrayed them as constantly fighting among themselves, destroying their own colonies, and slowly driving themselves extinct. Audiences across 12 species found it hilarious. Academic conferences regularly featured papers about humanity as well. Scientists used them as an example of evolutionary dead ends. They theorized that species driven by emotion and aggression would always destroy themselves if left alone. Some professors offered courses titled, "The Human Mistake: Why Violence Leads to Extinction." Counselor HFY, now elderly even by ethereal standards, had written several influential papers on the subject. Her work, The Containment Solution, Preventing Galactic Contamination by Violent Species, was required reading in diplomatic schools. She argued that isolating dangerous species was more humane than destroying them, as it gave them a chance to evolve naturally without threatening others. The human solar system itself had become a subject of scientific curiosity. Long-range sensors monitored the area constantly, but the readings were confusing. Human radio transmissions had stopped completely about 30 years ago. Some scientists thought this meant they had finally destroyed themselves as predicted, but other readings were more puzzling. The sensors detected massive construction projects around Jupiter and Saturn. Strange energy signatures appeared and disappeared regularly. There were signs of mining operations in the asteroid belt on a scale that seemed impossible for such a primitive species. Dr. Veltar, a Minoran scientist who specialized in stellar engineering, had been studying these readings for decades. His crystal-like body could process data faster than most organic brains, but even he could not make sense of what he was seeing. "The energy output from their system has increased by 3,000%, he told his colleagues during a scientific conference. "But we detect no new fusion reactors, no antimatter facilities, nothing that could explain these numbers." A colleague from the Hive Collective buzzed her response through a translator. "Perhaps they have discovered zero-point energy extraction. It would explain the readings." Dr. Veltar's crystalline form flickered with doubt. Zero-point energy requires a level of understanding that should take centuries to develop. Humans were barely capable of fusion power when we last had contact. "Maybe they found ancient technology," suggested another scientist. "The galaxy is full of ruins from extinct civilizations." This theory was popular among researchers. They imagined that humans had stumbled across some abandoned alien technology and were now playing with forces they did not understand. Most predicted this would lead to their destruction within a few more decades. Meanwhile, the galaxy continued to grow and prosper. New colonies were established in distant systems. Art and culture flourished as species shared their traditions. Scientific advances came regularly through cooperation between different alien minds. The Ethereal Collective had developed new forms of faster-than-light communication. The Saurians had perfected energy shield technology. The Minorans had learned to create artificial gravity wells. Each breakthrough was shared with all council members, leading to rapid advancement across all species. Peace was maintained through careful diplomacy and mutual benefit. When conflicts did arise, they were settled through negotiation and compromise. No major wars had been fought in over 200 years. The galaxy seemed to have achieved a perfect balance. Ambassador Kethvar often spoke about this golden age during public ceremonies. "We have created something beautiful," he would say to cheering crowds. "A civilization based on reason and cooperation rather than violence and fear." We have proven that intelligent species can live together in harmony when they reject the primitive urges that drive lesser beings. The crowds would cheer even louder when he mentioned the successful containment of humanity. It had become a symbol of galactic wisdom, triumphing over chaos. But not everyone had forgotten about humans entirely. Some younger members of the council occasionally asked questions about them during meetings. "What if we were wrong?" a young ethereal diplomat had asked during one session. "What if humans have changed during their isolation?" Counselor Zeph High had answered with patience. Species do not change their fundamental nature in mere decades. Violence and aggression are deeply embedded in human psychology. If anything, 50 years of isolation have probably made them more unstable, not less. Ambassador Kethvar had agreed. The ban was wise then, and it remains wise now. Some problems are best solved by containment rather than confrontation. There were occasionally reports from deep space sensors about strange ships detected near the edge of human territory. These ships did not match any known human designs. They were larger and more advanced than anything humans should have been, capable of building. But the reports were always dismissed as sensor errors or misidentified asteroids. After all, everyone knew that humans were primitive and isolated. They had been cut off from galactic technology and knowledge for half a century. They could not possibly have advanced beyond their crude fusion rockets and projectile weapons. The few scientists who suggested otherwise were politely ignored. The galaxy had moved on from worrying about humanity. They had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened to species that chose violence over wisdom. In the great libraries of Nexus Prime, human history was filed under extinct and failed civilizations, right between the warlike Krellans and the self-destructive Vorthak. Scholars who studied these sections often noted the similarities between all three species. Violence, they concluded, was always a dead end for intelligent life. As the 50th anniversary of the human ban approached, Ambassador Kethvar began planning a celebration. It would commemorate 50 years of galactic peace and security. The TU centerpiece would be a museum exhibit showing the wisdom of the containment decision and the prosperity it had brought to civilized space. He never imagined that within just a few more years, everything would change. The galaxy that had grown, comfortable in its peaceful isolation, was about to face a threat unlike anything it had ever encountered, and when that threat came, they would finally understand the true cost of their decision to abandon humanity. But for now, the galaxy slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they had successfully contained the greatest danger to their civilization. They had no idea that their greatest mistake was about to catch up with them. The distress signal came from the edge of known space, from a region the galaxy had almost forgotten. The Kepler colonies had been humanity's farthest settlements before the ban was imposed. 3 small worlds orbiting a distant star, they had been cut off from Earth for 50 years, just like all other human outposts. Most galactic citizens had assumed these distant colonies had died out long ago. Without support from Earth or trade with other species, how could such small settlements survive? The few scientists who still monitored that region had detected no signals for decades. So when the emergency transmission reached Nexus Prime, it caused immediate confusion in the communications center. The signal was weak and broken, filled with static and interference. The technician on duty, a young ethereal named Lithara, almost dismissed it as cosmic background noise. But something about the frequency pattern caught her attention. She cleaned up the signal as much as possible and listened carefully. The voice that came through was definitely human, speaking in their crude but understandable language. The words were fragmented and desperate. Colonies under attack, something that devours worlds, cannot be reasoned with. They consume everything. Please, anyone who receives this, the things are spreading. They don't communicate. They just consume. Then the signal cut to static and went silent forever. Lithara immediately reported the transmission to her supervisor, who reported it to the Council Communications Department, who reported it to the Emergency Response Committee. Within hours, the message had reached the highest levels of galactic government. Ambassador Kethvar was in his office reviewing fleet deployment reports when the emergency alert came through. His aged eyes narrowed as he read the transcript of the human transmission. Probably some internal conflict, he muttered to his aide. Humans fighting among themselves again? We should ignore it. But Counselor HFY disagreed when the matter came before the emergency session. The signal mentioned something that devours worlds, she said thoughtfully. This does not sound like typical human warfare. What else could it be? Asked the delegate from the Hive Collective. Humans are always exaggerating their problems to sound more important. Dr. Veltar, the Minoran scientist, requested permission to send a probe to investigate. It would take 6 months to reach the Kepler system, he explained. If there is truly something threatening in that region, we should know about it. The council agreed, though most members expected to find nothing more than the ruins of failed human colonies. The probe was dispatched with advanced sensors and communication equipment. 6 months later, the probe reached the Kepler system and began transmitting its findings back to the council. The data that came back changed everything. The 3 colony worlds were still there, but they had been transformed into something horrible. Each planet had been stripped down to its core, leaving behind hollow shells of rock and metal. The surfaces were covered in strange, organic-looking structures that pulsed with unnatural life. More disturbing were the ships detected in the system. They were unlike anything in the galactic databases, massive vessels that seemed to be grown, rather than built, with surfaces that shifted and moved like living tissue. The probe sensors detected thousands of these ships, all different sizes but sharing the same organic appearance. Dr. Veltar presented the findings to an emergency council session. The chamber fell silent as the probe's images appeared on the main screen. The hollow planets looked like something out of a nightmare. The energy signatures are completely unknown, Dr. Veltar explained. These ships appear to be powered by some form of biological process. They show signs of rapid adaptation and growth. What happened to the human colonists? Asked Counselor HFY. Unknown. We detected no human life signs, no human technology, no traces of their settlements. It is as if they were completely absorbed. Ambassador Kethvar studied the images with growing unease. Could this be some human biological weapon that got out of control? Impossible, replied Dr. Veltar. The technology involved is far beyond anything humans possessed. These organisms show signs of intelligence and organization that would require millions of years to evolve naturally. Before anyone could respond, the probe's transmission suddenly cut off. The last image showed one of the organic ships approaching, the probe with structures extending from its hull like reaching arms. The council chamber erupted in worried discussions. For the first time in centuries, they faced a completely unknown threat. Worse, the probe's final transmission showed that the organic ships were beginning to move away from the Kepler system, heading deeper into galactic space. Over the following weeks, reports began coming in from other systems. Deep space monitoring stations detected massive energy signatures moving between stars. Trade ships reported strange objects on the edge of their sensor range. Several remote research stations went silent without explanation. The pattern was always the same. First came reports of unknown ships. Then communication was lost. When investigation teams finally arrived, they found worlds stripped bare and strange organic structures spreading across the surface. The enemy, as they came to be known, did not communicate. They sent no messages, made no demands, offered no terms. They simply arrived, consumed everything they found, and moved on to the next system. It became clear that they were not interested in conquest or domination. They were interested only in consumption. Galactic scientists worked frantically to understand the threat. They called the invaders the Devourers because of their behavior. Analysis of the few encounters that survivors reported showed that the Devourers could adapt their technology rapidly. Weapons that worked in one battle were useless in the next. More terrifying was their ability to convert matter directly into more of their kind. They did not just destroy worlds, they transformed everything they found into resources for their fleet. Every ship they destroyed, every station they consumed, every planet they stripped made them stronger. Ambassador Kethvar found himself in charge of the largest military mobilization in galactic history. The Saurian Empire's fleets were reinforced by ships from every council member. Crystal vessels from the Minoran Republic joined energy beings from the nebula worlds. The insect ships of the Hive Collective flew alongside ethereal research vessels converted for war. The combined galactic fleet was massive beyond imagination. Over 10,000 ships of various designs, crewed by the best minds and warriors from 12 different species. They carried the most advanced weapons and shields ever created. Surely nothing could stand against such overwhelming force. The fleet intercepted the Devourer swarm at the Rigel system, a major trade hub with billions of inhabitants. The battle began with confidence from the galactic forces. Their weapons were precise and powerful. Their shields were nearly impenetrable. Their coordination was perfect. For the first few hours, it seemed like victory was assured. Galactic weapons tore through Devourer ships, destroying dozens of the organic vessels. The alien swarm seemed confused by the coordinated attack, but then the Devourers began to adapt. Ships that had been destroyed by energy weapons suddenly became resistant to energy attacks. Vessels that had been torn apart by kinetic projectiles developed armor that absorbed physical impacts. The organic hulls began shifting and changing, developing new weapons and defenses in real time. Even worse, destroyed Devourer ships did not just disappear. Their remains were quickly absorbed by other vessels which used the material to grow larger and more powerful. Every galactic victory made the enemy stronger. The tide of battle turned quickly. Devourer ships that had seemed primitive began displaying technology that matched and then exceeded galactic capabilities. They adapted not just their defenses but their weapons as well, creating new forms of attack that bypassed galactic shields entirely. Ambassador Kethvar watched in horror from his command ship as the greatest fleet in galactic history was systematically destroyed. Ships that had taken decades to build were torn apart in minutes. Crews with centuries of experience were consumed along with their vessels. The retreat was a complete disaster. Less than half the galactic fleet escaped the Rigel system. Behind them, the Devourers began their work on the inhabited planets. Within days, 3 worlds that had housed billions of sentient beings were reduced to hollow shells. The survivors brought back terrifying reports. The Devourers learned from every encounter. They absorbed technology, tactics, and even biological information from everything they consumed. They were not just an enemy. They were an adaptive plague that grew, stronger with each victory. The galaxy faced the unthinkable reality that their greatest military effort had been a complete failure. Conventional warfare was useless against an enemy that could adapt to any attack and grow stronger from every defeat. In the emergency council session that followed, the delegates sat in stunned silence. Their perfect civilization, built on reason and cooperation, had no answer for a threat that could not be reasoned with or cooperated with. For the first time in their history, they faced an enemy that understood only consumption and growth. As reports came in of more systems falling to the Devourer advance, one thought began to occur to some of the younger council members. But it was a thought too terrible to voice out loud. The Devourer advance continued without mercy. After Rigel fell, 3 more systems were consumed in rapid succession. The Antares mining colonies, the Vega research stations, and the peaceful agricultural worlds of the Centauri cluster all suffered the same fate. Billions of lives were lost in a matter of weeks. Refugee ships clogged the major trade routes as populations fled from the advancing threat. Space stations that had never seen more than a few thousand visitors suddenly hosted millions of desperate beings. The carefully organized galactic economy began to collapse under the strain. Emergency sessions of the Council were held around the clock. Military commanders from every species worked together, trying to find some weakness in the Devourer forces. But every strategy they developed was countered within hours of being used. The enemy learned faster than the galaxy could adapt. Dr. Veltar had been working without sleep for days, analyzing every scrap of data from encounters with the Devourers. His crystalline form had dimmed from exhaustion, but he continued his research. They process information at an incredible rate, he reported to the Council. Each ship appears to share knowledge instantly with all others. When we damage one vessel, every ship in their fleet learns how to resist that damage. Counselor HFY had aged visibly during the crisis. Her normally glowing skin had turned pale with stress. Our psychological warfare experts believe they operate as a single mind spread across multiple bodies. Individual ships have no independent thought. This makes them impossible to negotiate with or confuse. Ambassador Kethavar paced back and forth in the council chamber, his old scales making scraping sounds against the floor. We need new weapons, something they have never encountered before, something they cannot adapt to. We have tried everything, replied the delegate from the Hive Collective. Plasma weapons, gravity bombs, quantum disruptors, biological agents, computer viruses, even temporal distortion fields. They adapt to everything within hours. The military situation was becoming hopeless. The remaining galactic fleets had pulled back to defensive positions around the most important worlds. But everyone knew these defenses would not hold for long. The Devourers were growing stronger with every victory, incorporating the best of galactic technology into their organic ships. Some species began making terrible decisions. The Minoran Republic started considering evacuation to another galaxy entirely. The Nebula world spoke of retreating into deep space where organic life could not follow. Even the proud Saurian Empire was drawing up plans to abandon their outer colonies. It was during one of these desperate planning sessions that a young council aide named Yith made a suggestion that stopped all conversation. Yith was a junior diplomat from a small species that had only recently joined the council. She rarely spoke during meetings, preferring to take notes and observe. "What about the humans?" she asked quietly. The chamber fell completely silent. For a moment, nobody seemed to understand what she had said. Ambassador Kethavar turned to stare at her. "What did you say?" "The humans," Yith repeated, her voice growing stronger. "The species we banned 50 years ago. What if we asked them for help?" The reaction was immediate and angry. Several delegates began shouting at once. "Humans are primitive savages," roared a Saurian commander. "They have been isolated for 50 years, buzzed the Hive representative. "They probably do not even have spaceflight anymore. Even if they survived, what could they possibly do that we cannot?" asked an ethereal scientist. Ambassador Kethavar held up his hand for silence. "The human question is settled. They were correctly identified as too dangerous and unpredictable for galactic civilization. We will not repeat the mistakes of the past by involving them in our current crisis." But as the days passed and more systems fell to the Devourers, Yith's suggestion began to spread quietly among the younger council members. They whispered to each other during breaks in the meetings. What if she was right? What if we need them? The older delegates refused to consider it. They had built their entire careers on the wisdom of the human containment. To admit they might need human help would be to admit that 50 years of policy had been wrong. More reports arrived daily. The Devourer fleet was now estimated at over 50,000 ships and growing rapidly. They had consumed the resources of 7 star systems and were showing no signs of slowing down. Worse, intelligence reports suggested they were learning to reproduce faster than ever before. Dr. Veltar made a particularly disturbing discovery. "Analysis of their expansion pattern shows they are not moving randomly," he reported. "They are following major trade routes and targeting systems with the highest populations and most advanced technology. They are deliberately seeking out our most developed worlds." This meant the Devourers were not just mindless consumers. They showed strategic thinking and long-term planning. They knew which targets would give them the greatest advantage and were prioritizing those attacks. The psychological impact on the galaxy was devastating. Species that had lived in peace for centuries suddenly faced extinction. Ancient civilizations that had survived for millions of years watched their colonies being consumed one by one. It was Counselor HFY who finally broke the taboo. During a late-night emergency session, after receiving reports that the Devourers were now only 6 systems away from major population centers, she spoke the words that everyone had been thinking, but nobody dared say. "Perhaps we should consider contacting the humans." The chamber erupted in angry voices, but she continued speaking over them. "We have tried everything else. Our greatest weapons have failed. Our most brilliant strategies have been countered. We face complete extinction unless we find a new approach. Ambassador Kethvar's voice was cold with fury. Humans are violent primitives who were correctly contained for the safety of the galaxy. They have been silent for 50 years. They are probably extinct, and if they are not, they certainly cannot help us with problems we cannot solve ourselves. What if they are not extinct? Asked Yeath, speaking up again despite the hostile stares directed at her. What if they have been developing in isolation? They might have technologies we do not know about. Impossible, snapped a Saurian general. They were barely capable of fusion power when we last had contact. Without access to galactic knowledge, they could not have advanced significantly. But Dr. Veltar looked thoughtful. The sensor readings from their system have been unusual for decades. We have detected massive construction projects and energy signatures we could not explain. Perhaps they have been more active than we assumed. The debate raged for hours. The older delegates argued that contacting humans would be both useless and dangerous. The younger members pointed out that the galaxy faced extinction anyway, so the risk might be worth taking. Finally, as dawn approached and reports came in of another system falling to the Devourers, Ambassador Kethvar made a decision that went against everything he had believed for 50 years. We will send a single message, he announced. One transmission to the human system. If they respond and if they can offer meaningful assistance, we will consider temporary cooperation. But this does not mean we accept them as equals or approve of their violent nature. The message was carefully crafted by the Council's best diplomats. It was brief and formal. Humanity. The galaxy faces an existential threat from an unknown enemy. Your species' ban from galactic civilization is temporarily suspended. If you can offer assistance, respond immediately with your terms. The message was transmitted toward Earth using the most powerful communications array in the galaxy. It would take several hours to reach the human system and several more hours for any response to return. Most council members expected no reply at all. After 50 years of silence, humanity had probably destroyed itself or regressed to a primitive state. Even if they survived, what could they possibly do that the combined might of 12 advanced civilizations could not? But exactly 24 hours after the message was sent, a response arrived. It was short and consisted of only 2 pieces of information: spatial coordinates for a location near the edge of human space, and a timestamp indicating when the galaxy's representatives should arrive. There was no greeting, no acknowledgement of the past 50 years, no explanation of what humanity could offer. Just coordinates and a time. The response was so brief and unexpected that it caused new arguments among the council members. Some saw it as proof that humans were still primitive and could not be trusted with complex communication. Others wondered what the coordinates might mean and why the humans were so confident they could help. Ambassador Kethvar stared at the message for a long time. Something about its tone bothered him. It was not the desperate plea of a dying civilization, or the confused response of primitives who did not understand the situation. It was calm, confident, and strangely ominous. Against his better judgment, he found himself wondering what the humans had been doing during 50 years of imposed silence. And for the first time in decades, he was not entirely sure he wanted to know the answer. The emergency council session was held in the most secure chamber on Nexus Prime. The station's shields were at maximum power, and patrol ships circled constantly. Nobody knew what to expect from this meeting with humanity, but they were taking no chances. The delegates arrived expecting to meet with multiple human representatives, perhaps a delegation similar to their own diplomatic missions. They prepared for long negotiations, formal presentations, and detailed discussions about what assistance humanity might provide in exchange for readmission to galactic society. Instead, they found a single human female waiting in the chamber. She wore a simple black military uniform with no decorations or rank insignia that the aliens could recognize. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style. She appeared to be middle-aged by human standards, with calm eyes that seemed to see everything at once. She stood at attention near the chamber's center, hands clasped behind her back. As the Delegates took their seats. The human remained motionless. She did not fidget or show any signs of nervousness. She did not try to make conversation or offer formal greetings. She simply waited. Ambassador Kethvar was the first to speak. His aged voice carried both authority and uncertainty. I am Ambassador Kethvar of the Saurian Empire, Supreme Military Commander of the Galactic Defense Forces. State your name and authority to represent humanity. The human's response was crisp and professional. Admiral Sarah Chen, United Earth Defense Command. I am authorized to speak for all human settlements and military forces. United Earth Defense Command, repeated Counselor HFY. We are not familiar with this organization. What happened? To the various human governments we dealt with 50 years ago. They were consolidated during the isolation period, Admiral Chen replied. When you cut off all external contact, we decided internal divisions were a luxury we could not afford. Dr. Veltar leaned forward, his crystalline body reflecting the chamber's lights. Admiral Chen, we must be honest with you. The galaxy faces a threat unlike anything we have encountered before. An enemy that adapts to all our weapons and grows stronger from our defeats. We have lost millions of lives and multiple star systems. Our greatest military forces have been destroyed. Admiral Chen nodded once. Yes, we have been monitoring the situation. The delegates exchanged surprised glances. Ambassador Kethvar's scales darkened with suspicion. Monitoring? How could you monitor events outside your system? Our ban specifically prohibited any human ships from leaving your solar system. The ban prohibited our ships from crossing the heliosphere, Admiral Chen corrected. You said nothing about passive observation. We have been watching galactic activities for the entire 50 years of our isolation. Counselor HFY's ethereal features brightened with understanding. The unusual energy signatures our scientists detected around your outer planets. Those were sensor arrays, were they not? Among other things, Admiral Chen confirmed. The young aide Yith spoke up nervously. Admiral, do you believe humanity can help us against this threat? We have lost our most advanced fleets and weapons. What could you possibly do that we cannot? Admiral, Chen's expression did not change. You want to know what we have been doing for 50 years, watch. She activated a device on her wrist, and holographic displays filled the air around the chamber. The delegates gasped as images began appearing before them. The first images showed the human solar system, but it was completely transformed. Jupiter was no longer a gas giant. Instead, it had been converted into a massive shipyard complex, with thousands of construction platforms orbiting where the planet used to be. The famous red spot was now an enormous space station that dwarfed anything in the galactic fleet. Saturn's rings had been replaced with orbital weapons platforms that formed a perfect defensive grid around the planet. Each platform was the size of a small moon and bristled with weapons of unknown design. The planet's surface was covered with military installations that extended deep underground. Mars had been terraformed, but not for farming or cities. The entire planet was one massive military training complex. The red surface was marked with firing ranges, test facilities, and training grounds that could be seen from orbit. Even Earth had changed. The blue-green world was surrounded by a shell of space stations and defensive platforms. The moon had been hollowed out and converted into a fortress that could probably fight entire fleets by itself. But most shocking were the ships. Thousands upon thousands of vessels filled the space between planets. These were not the crude fusion rockets that humanity had possessed 50 years ago. These were sleek, angular ships that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved in perfect formation, turning and maneuvering with precision that rivaled the best galactic navies. Ambassador Kethvar stared at the images in disbelief. This is impossible. You could not have built all of this without galactic technology and resources. Admiral Chen's response was matter-of-fact. We had 50 years and strong motivation. When you told us we were too violent for galactic society, we decided to become very good at violence. Dr. Veltar was analyzing the technical data streaming from the holographic displays. His crystal body was flashing rapidly as he processed information. The energy output from these installations is beyond anything we thought possible. How did you achieve such advances without our knowledge? We studied everything, Admiral Chen replied. Every galactic transmission we intercepted, every technical specification that leaked from your trade networks, every tactical report from your military exercises. We learned about your technologies, your strategies, your weaknesses. We also learned about your enemies. The chamber fell silent. Counselor, HFY was the first to understand the implications. You knew about the Devourers. You knew they were coming. Admiral Chen nodded. Our deep space sensor networks detected them 37 years ago. Long-range scouts confirmed their nature and capabilities. We have been preparing for this exact scenario ever since. The holographic display changed to show detailed intelligence reports about the Devourer forces. The information was far more complete than anything the galactic forces had compiled. It showed Devourer ship designs, tactical patterns, adaptation methods, and even weaknesses that the galactic scientists had never discovered. How? Whispered Ambassador Kethvar. How could you know so much about them when our greatest minds could barely understand their basic nature? Admiral Chen's expression remained calm. Because we think like them. Not the consumption part, but the adaptation part, the learning part, the part that studies every enemy and finds ways to defeat them. She gestured, and the display showed human battle doctrine. It was unlike anything the galactic species had developed. Where galactic tactics focused on overwhelming force and technological superiority, human tactics were based on deception, adaptation, and exploitation of enemy weaknesses. Your approach to warfare is based on the assumption that superior technology and numerical advantage will win battles, Admiral Chen explained. This works well against rational enemies who think like you do. But the Devourers are not rational. They are adaptive. Every time you use the same tactic twice, they learn to counter it. The display showed human weapons that the galactic delegates had never imagined. Quantum disruption devices that could tear apart molecular bonds. Viral warfare systems designed to corrupt and turn enemy technology against itself. Psychological warfare tactics that could exploit weaknesses in hive mind thinking. But most impressive were the AI systems. Human ships were controlled by artificial intelligences that could learn and adapt in real time. These AIs had been studying Devourer tactics for decades and had developed countermeasures for every known enemy capability. Your artificial intelligence systems are beyond anything we have achieved, admitted Dr. Veltar. We always believed AI development was too dangerous for organic species to pursue. That is because you think of AI as a potential replacement for organic intelligence, Admiral Chen replied. We developed AI as a tool for enhancing organic intelligence. Our AIs do not think for us. They help us think faster and better. Ambassador. Kethvar's voice was barely above a whisper. You have built a military force specifically designed to fight the Devourers. We have built a military force designed to fight anyone who threatens humanity or its allies, Admiral Chen corrected. The Devourers are simply the most obvious current threat. The final holographic display showed human fleets already in position throughout galactic space. While the Council had been debating and planning, human ships had been moving into strategic positions around every major system. They had been invisible to galactic sensors, but they were there, waiting. The chamber was completely silent. Every delegate stared at the displays with a mixture of awe and terror. The species they had dismissed as primitive savages had spent 50 years becoming the most formidable military force the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral Chen finally spoke into the silence. The Devourer fleet will be eliminated within 72 hours. Our forces are already engaging their advanced scouts. The main battle will take place at the Proxima Nexus, where we have prepared the battlefield to our advantage. Ambassador Kethvar found his voice. And after the Devourers are defeated, what do you want from us?